Good morning, Woodland. Welcome to the very first session of our summer series, Arrested Development. It's a study of faith. Faith that is dynamic, not static. Faith that is developing. Now, this study originated from several different sources. The first was my grandmother. When I was a child, I grew up learning so much from her. She helped raise me. I spent a lot of time, for instance, on her lap where she would read me books, tell me stories, and talk about things that were very important. One particular day, she was talking about heaven. And she looked at me and she said, "You may not recognize me right away in heaven." And I said, "How's that?" She said, "Well, I'm going to look different." And I said, "How's that?" She said, "Well, I'm going to be younger. I'm going to be thinner. My hair is going to be a different color. It's going to be blonde. But you can always see me if you look in my eyes." Heaven is found in someone's eyes. I had to think about that for a long time. It was the first time that it dawned on me that we all change physically, emotionally, and even spiritually. The second source that has influenced me in this study is biblical. It comes from the second chapter of Acts, where you remember that Simon Peter preaches that incredible sermon at Pentecost. And at the end of that chapter, it says that many were being saved. Being saved. Salvation is a process. We have been saved, we are being saved, and we will be saved. That's important to note. Another source for me in all of this is psychological. People like Erikson, Piaget, Kohlberg, they all talk about developmental psychology, developmental morality. It's a process. About the same time that I was learning about all of these people, I came across a fellow by the name of James Fowler. He was over at Emory University in Atlanta, and he talks about faith as being developmental, that we go through stages of faith. And over the years, I've discovered other people who believe like him, people like Scott Peck, people like Brian McLaren, that tell us that we go through various stages of faith. Now, over the study, we're going to look at those stages, and I've given you a handout to which you can refer during the studies that talk about various stages that they talk about, that I like to talk about. But I also think that one of the ways that we could really understand faith development is to look at a character in the Bible and how his faith developed. Simon Peter was one of Jesus' favorite disciples. And over the study, we're going to look about how Simon Peter's faith develops. To help us do that, Joel Kern is going to come and take on the personality of Simon Peter and help us understand Simon Peter's fellowship of Jesus Christ. This morning, we hear about Simon Peter's call to discipleship. Simon Peter?
Good morning. I'm known to most of you as Simon Peter. However, the name given to me by my parents is simply Simon. It was Jesus who gave me the second name. He called me Cephas, which is Aramaic for the Greek Petrus and the English Peter. Jesus gave me the nickname because the literal meaning was rock. Some of my friends said it was because I was so stubborn and my head was hard as a rock. I like to think it was because my faith was solid as a rock. Whatever. I was nicknamed Rocky, which Jesus and the others tended to call me. Actually, the only time Jesus didn't call me Rocky was at Caesarea Philippi, after I declared him Messiah. Then he called me by my given name, Simon Bar-Jonah. I took it as an acknowledgement of a formal pronouncement of an eternal declaration. I mention this simply to explain that I now go by the amalgamation Simon Peter, a title I think says so much about Jesus, because it's the combination of the human and what I would call the spark of the divine. I grew up in Galilee, one of the most conservative places in all of Israel, and I was one of the most conservative of the conservatives. An ardent Jew, I was convinced that we were God's chosen ones. I believed the Torah to be literally true, and as I would tell anyone who would listen, the Torah said it, and I believe it, and that's enough. I also believed in the coming of the Messiah as a political leader who would come and conquer Rome, put things back in order for Israel. In a nutshell, that's what I believed until that fateful day at the Sea of Galilee. I was a fisherman by trade. I owned my own boat and employed my own crew. However, the fishing business had been gutted by the Romans. The Emperor Tiberius nationalized the industry, and much of what I caught went to his coffers. It made so many of us irate to the point of considering becoming zealots, revolutionaries. On that particular day, the crew and I had completed our fishing, which was at that time of the year mostly at night. We were in a surly mood. We hadn't caught anything, and so the routine of cleaning the nets was more of a chore than usual. Jesus of Nazareth came where we were. With him was a huge crowd. I knew who he was. My little brother Andrew couldn't stop talking about him. He was convinced that Jesus was the Messiah. I dismissed most of that. Andrew, God bless him, has a very active imagination. Jesus and I knew each other enough to address one another courteously, but not much more than that, at least on my part. That particular morning, Jesus came up to me and said, "Simon, I need to borrow your boat." I thought it odd he didn't ask. He just ordered in his gentle but commanding way. He must have read the expression on my face which said, "Whatever for?" Because he said, "I'd like to use it as a pulpit. From the sea, my voice will carry better." I shrugged, helped him in, then pushed a few cubits away. We anchored the boat, and he spoke for the better part of an hour. I could tell my crew was getting cranky. They became even crankier when, after dismissing the crowd, he told me that he wanted me to take him fishing. I didn't want to sound disrespectful, but that was the last thing I or my crew wanted to do. I even said as much. "Jesus, I fish the sea every day. I know every bit of it. I know when the fish are biting, they are not biting today. It would be a waste of time." He smiled and said, "Humor me, Simon." Against my better judgment, and much to the irritation of my crew, who were convinced this was a bad idea, if not altogether a waste of time, and it meant we were going to lose more time having to clean the nets still when we came back, I directed them to get in the boat, paddle out to deeper waters. We hadn't gone far, still within shouting distance of the beach, when Jesus said, "Here, put the nets in here." My crew looked at me and I looked at Jesus, our looks giving away our incredulity. I said in a not so pleasant tone, "Jesus, there are no fish here. Trust me." Jesus gently smiled and said, "Simon, trust me." And for reasons only God knew, I said, "Lower the nets, boys." They did, and in no time there was a disturbance in the water, one that signaled a school of fish, a huge school, so huge that I had to yell at my partners, James and John, they were still on the shore, to come and help. The catch was enormous, almost tearing our nets apart. When we made our way back to shore, our crews were euphoric. It was the biggest catch ever. As the men began unloading the fish, I looked up to see Jesus peering at me. And it was then that it dawned on me. He was who Andrew had proclaimed, and I did something I had never done before. I wept. I wept because I could think of the many ways I had failed my family, my friends, and my God. Jesus came and squeezed my shoulders. "Trust me, Simon." And I did. And so did James and John, who witnessed everything. From that moment, everything changed. I wish I could report that I always made good with Jesus' trust. But the truth is, my life of faith has its peaks and valleys. But this morning I can say to you, I believe in him, which is another way of saying I trust him. What about you?
Thank you, Simon Peter. This morning, we've noted, Simon Peter, what I would like to call stage one. Stage one is a place in faith of givenness, that we have been given our faith in a lot of ways. Like our families give us a worldview, our culture gives us a worldview, it also gives us a faith view. And I'd like to think about stage one for us in our discussion as being our baptism. What is it do you remember about your baptism? What did you believe about God then? What did you believe about Jesus? What did you believe about the Holy Spirit, the church, salvation? What was your faith like? Now, what is your faith like?